any way Michael Richards can repair his reputation? We're going to talk to an expert. But first, our top story tonight, chaos and mayhem in Iraq. Shiite militiamen doused 6 Sunni Arabs with kerosene and burned them alive as Iraqi soldiers stood by. And 19 other Sunnis were killed in attacks on their mosques today, apparently taking revenge for the slaughter of at least 215 Shiites in Baghdad yesterday. A White House spokesman said today the recent attacks are, quote, a brazen effort to topple Iraq's government. So what should the U.S. do now? Joining us from Washington is PJ Crowley, a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress, and from Portland, Oregon, Mike Baker, a former CIA officer. Guys, thanks for being with us. Look, this is as close to a civil war as I think you can get without people flat out saying it's a civil war. PJ, let's start with you. As we move closer and closer to that, how does the military role for the United States change? In other words, why should we be in the middle of this sectarian fighting when these people are intent on killing one another?
And I think, John, we have to realize that increasingly the violence that we see in Iraq is driven by Shias against Sunnis, Sunnis among themselves. It is a civil war. It is one among, say, 4 wars. You know, the Shias, the Sunnis, the Baathists, you know, the al-Qaeda elements, you know, in Iraq. And really, this violence, less and less the American military is able to contend with. We don't own the solutions to these. Ultimately, the Iraqis themselves do.
Mike, I've been arguing, or at least making the point, that a lot of people say we didn't have enough troops, maybe we should have more troops, blah, blah, blah. I think we're fighting 2,000 years worth of history. And in that case, how does a husband, you know, a spouse or a mom and dad want to see their kid in the middle of people who just have 2,000 years worth of hatred killing one another? Why do we get in the middle of that?
Right, well, I think that's really a point that you've just raised. And also, stepping back to what you've said earlier, I agree with PJ. We're playing a completely ridiculous game of semantics here in not wanting to come out and say this is a civil war. You know, if it looks like a duck talks, it's a duck. It's a civil war. There's no doubt about it at this point. And in terms of what we're fighting, the cultural history, this is not, at this point, the Americans are not driving this violence. Yet, of course, we take the heat for it. This is Muslim attacking Muslim. This is reduced now to almost a tribal situation where, at the end of the day, I think, you know, from my perspective and from that of others that I've been dealing with, we're looking at partitioning here down the road. And as an answer, when people say, well, what's the solution here? The solution is, hey, we removed a strong man and it unleashed chaos, and now we're going to devolve, in all likelihood, into a partitioning situation along tribal lines more than religious lines. Don't think Sunni, Shiite, and Kurd. Start thinking about the old tribal arrangements, and there'll be some element of peace there, but it will be kept by force, by coercion, and by commerce.
Well, let's talk about that, because, PJ, that's where I wanted to go, and that is you may have de facto breaking down, division, partition, just like we saw in Bosnia. You're going to have the Shia in the south, you're going to have Sunni in the middle, and perhaps some of the Shia have to leave, and you'll have the Kurds up north. The question is, what is the U.S. role if we get into that situation? I would assume it's to prevent major genocide, but tell me, what is wrong with that sort of a configuration?
And that may be what we end up with, John. The one element in the middle that you describe, unfortunately, in the center is also Baghdad, you know, which has very significant elements among each of those communities.
PJ, I know that, but, you know,
others.
But we've seen 1 million people leave Iraq, is what they're now saying. So obviously, in that kind of a circumstance, right, you're going to see people leaving there. I mean, I know it's complicated than that, but isn't that where this is headed?
And it may well be. I mean, I think there are some real structural problems with a Sunni center, because the last thing that we want to do is leave Iraq and leave in it a Sunni-led or al-Qaeda-dominated safe haven in the middle. That said, we may well end up there, but those choices are the choices really at this point that the Iraqis have to make. First and foremost, we have to try to contain, you know, any of this from spilling over into a wider swath of area, including Iran, Syria, other countries.
But Mike, couldn't that be our role, though? Our role is to help maintain some semblance of a central government, to prevent al-Qaeda from getting a foothold, and to stop ethnic cleansing. That could be our military purpose. Then we're not in the middle of the shooting, right?
In an ideal world, that would be our function. Unfortunately, on planet Earth, I think our function here, our purpose is to extricate ourselves probably with as minimal amount of chaos as possible. I think really the train's left the station in terms of our influence there when we start talking about Iran and Syria. And also that opens up a whole other can of worms.
Do you think they got a lot of influence there? Are we overstating the role of Iran in Syria?
Well, no, I'm saying I'm not saying we're overstating their influence. I'm saying we may be overstating our influence.
Yes.
Iran and Syria, they're taking steps that we don't know about at this point. They've got their own agendas, and they're going to drive those agendas with or without us, and they really, frankly, would rather do it without us. You look at Syria. We talk about, well, we need to dialogue more with Syria. Look what just happened in the Lebanon.
It looks like they just assassinated. You know, it's a very intractable problem. PJ, we have this commission now, the Baker Commission. On that commission are people like Vernon Jordan and Sandra Day O'Connor. Now, I mean, what the heck? They know nothing about what's going on. I mean, in Iraq and military strategy. So what's this Baker Commission all about?
Well, you do have inside the commission some who have national security experience, Baker himself, Hamilton, Bill Perry, former Secretary of Defense.
Right.
But you also have political fixers and distinguished jurists like Senator Day O'Connor. I think first and foremost, you know, there's no silver bullet that's going to come out of the Baker-Hamilton Commission. This is about fashioning a political pivot as opposed to fashioning an effective strategy. That said, what they can do is say to the President and to the Congress, these are the, the strategy is not working. The capacity of Iraq is such and such.
Give them the cover to switch.
And give them the cover so that we have a shift from what is a military strategy to a political one.
All right. Mike, you get the last question, and we only have a second left. Duncan Hunter, Congressman Hunter, says, bring the Iraqis from the calm areas of Iraq into Baghdad. Let them do more of the job. Good idea. Can it work?
It's an idea. I wouldn't call it a good idea. Will it work? No, it won't work.
All right.
There you go.
Well, I mean, what a mess. But I think the idea that perhaps we assume a role not in the middle of people that want to kill each other may give some hope to the way in which we ought to proceed. Guys, thanks for being with us. Coming up, Michael Richards is trying to fix